This week on Between the Links, after the biggest win of his career at UFC San Antonio, where does Leon Edwards go from here? How big of a draw can Greg Hardy be coming off of his victory over Juan Adams? What is going on with James Vick? Jon Jones is in trouble again? And what is the biggest storyline heading into this weekend's UFC 240 card in Edmonton? All that and more coming up tonight on Between the Links. All right, welcome back to a brand new edition of Between the Links on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. My name is Mike Heck. I'm your host, and as we say each and every week at this time, there's a lot to discuss, so let's get right to it. Special guest this week, as already mentioned, is a man who's just hustling around like a madman these days. He's covering events, he's getting a ton of content on location, and he's doing things a bit outside the normal scheduled activities, and I love that stuff. We're being joined by the aforementioned Nick Baldwin. How are you, Nick? Let the folks know where they can find your great work.
I'm doing very good. First of all, Mike, and everyone else here, appreciate you guys having me on. Everyone can find me on Twitter at Nick Baldwin MMA, and they can check out my work at bloodyelbow.com. Just couple quick plugs as far as what's coming up. Andre Feely interview will be posted tomorrow morning, and then I got later on in the week interviews with UFC Edmonton's Marc-Andre Barriault and PFL's Jesse Ronson.
Excellent. We're going to get the show rocking and rolling. For a full list of rules, ladies and gentlemen, I say this all the time, go back and check out the archives of the old shows. If you're listening for the first time, go back and listen to the old ones. You'll know what the show's all about, how it all works. The rebuttal rule is in effect, which each player can invoke once throughout the game whenever they see fit. So if either of you guys want to challenge another member of the panel, just put it in the chat. We'll get you going, and we'll have those rebuttals. So let's kick things off with everything that happened this past Saturday night. The UFC was in San Antonio, and let's be honest, the card was kind of overall, but things certainly picked up as the night progressed. In the main event, Leon Edwards took on Rafael dos Anjos, and Rocky looked pretty darn good in that fight en route to a unanimous decision win. Some people had RDA win in the final round, but if you told me Edwards had a clean sweep in the fight, I wouldn't argue with you whatsoever. After the fight, he gets on the microphone, he calls out Jorge Masvidal, he calls him a weasel, and tries to set himself up for a big fight, which I don't blame him. But I thought personally the name was right, but I didn't think Leon's call out was that sound bite that will live on for very long. It didn't age well. It didn't really age at all, in my opinion, but that's just because he's not a talker. So I guess my question is, as great as Leon Edwards looked on Saturday, and based on the current landscape of the UFC welterweight division, along with these huge personalities that are attached to it, will that lead to anything other than another tough fight in the headliner of a fight night card for Leon Edwards? David, said we start with you.
Why don't we just piggyback off of almost every single thing you said? Because you said almost everything I was going to say. The key words of all of that question are very simple. Personalities are what not only make this division one of the most exciting in the world, but it puts it over the edge, so to speak, as one of the most watched upon divisions in the world. Conor McGregor is at lightweight for a reason. The Colby Covington, who knows how many Instagram followers or whatever his following would be if he had not decided to play the heel. Regardless, this division is full of it. This division is full of personality, and you know who helps with that in zero ways whatsoever is Leon Edwards. Whether it's the cowboy pre-fight press conference I'm going to put him away. That's all he said for like 20 minutes straight is I'm going to put him away over and over again. It's hard to envision him getting anything other than just what you said in the way you asked the question right in our chat. Tough fights on fight nights, main events. 8 wins in a row, and you fought Peter Sabata last year. I'm not sure how high his trajectory is in welterweight right now.
Nick Ball, we go to you. And yes, I mentioned a lot of things in my opening to that question there, but we've seen guys like the Damian Mines of the world get not one, but 2 title shots throughout his career. And we've seen other guys lacking a little bit of personality get title shots, but the landscape of the division is very interesting. Can we expect anything more for Leon Edwards past a headliner on a fight night card at this point?
I think we can. I just don't know if that happens right away. If you look back on who Damian Maia had to beat to get that title shot, he had to beat just about everybody. He had to do everything possible to get that title shot because the UFC just didn't really want Damian Maia as their UFC welterweight champion because he's not going to sell tickets. Leon Edwards kind of falls in the same category, although he is willing to talk a bit more trash than Damian, so that's good, but his personality just isn't quite what even Kamaru Usman's personality is, or Colby Covington. He needs to do more. Winning fights is great, and as far as just us watching the fights as fans go, I enjoy Edwards' fights. That performance over RDA was great, but as you guys talked about already, the call out of Jorge was good. Of course, that's the call out you need after a big win over RDA, but just the way he phrased it, as you said, there was no soundbite really in that call out. I do think Leon can reach a title shot, and at this point, he is very close to deserving of one. But unfortunately for him, it's a stacked division, and unless you have take photos on Instagram with half naked porn stars like Colby Covington, that's kind of what you got to do to get a title shot.
Keith, what do you think, sir?
Well, he probably won't. They'll probably put him against Tyron Woodley, possibly even Ben Askren. But it should be Jorge Masvidal, and I think the UFC make a big mistake if they don't make it. If Jorge Masvidal doesn't get rewarded the title fight and he goes to Colby Covington if he beats Robbie Lawler, which it should, and we spoke about that last week and I can think of that anymore, it has to be the only other matchup for Masvidal has to be Edwards. You can't give a guy a 3-piece in a soda and then, don't want to fight him in the cage. I mean, you don't hit a kid in high school and get separated by the principal, then the kid publicly challenge you to fight in the park, and then you back off and play off like a gangster. If anything, I think Masvidal's kind of coming off, kind of like as a prima donna. Edwards like, hey, let's settle in the cage, and now Masvidal doesn't want anything to do with him. If you don't want to fight him, then don't attack him backstage, ignore him. If you don't want to fight him, don't start tweeting at him after his fight. Don't do that stuff. Masvidal, I mean, we're all saying Masvidal should get a title fight because he's won 2 fights in a row. Edwards has won 8 fights in a row. We keep talking about Masvidal. The last time Edwards lost, Masvidal has lost 4 times since the last time Edwards has lost. Edwards, I mean, we're talking about because he beat Till and he beat Askren. Well, listen, Edwards is beating good guys. He beat Don Cerrone. He beat Gunnar Nelson. Now he just beat the shit out of RDA. People are saying it's not a big fight. All the UFC has to do is show the footage of them fighting backstage real quick, and that will become a big fight. You could put that on you can put that on the co-main event of Usman and Covington. And here's the biggest thing: if one of these guys lose before they match them up, the UFC just missed out on a big opportunity.
Craig Allen, something tells me that you're gonna have an exciting answer for us.
I mean, you're setting me up for failure. What if I don't? And I've already used 10 seconds, so now I'm really in trouble. Keith Schoen said that the fight to make is Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards was ranked 12th before this fight. He beat number 4 RDA. So there's a couple of fights that make sense. The aforementioned Tyron Woodley fight, you could have that on a pay-per-view main card. You could also have Santiago Ponzinibbio as a fight night main event. Both of them are going to move the needle a little bit. But Leon Edwards is nothing like his younger brother, Fabian. Fabian's a star in the making with Bellator because he grabs that mic and captivates an audience. Leon Edwards has nothing going for him in that way. And Nick brought up a really good point. Damian Maia is a guy that I've said here, who the hell would want to see Ben Askren fight Damian Maia? Keith Schoen would want to see that because Keith Schoen lives in this glass house and doesn't actually read social media comments, doesn't actually interact with people on the internet. This is a sport of mixed martial entertainment. It's not mixed martial arts. Leon Edwards is realistically 1 to 2 fights away from a title shot, but right now you have to capitalize on the now. You have to capitalize on the hottest star in the game. It's not Jon Jones, who's kind of slagging things down. It's not Greg Hardy who's making the most news. It's Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal is all over the internet. He's all over television, all over radio. You can't deny him the shot at a title, and it makes sense. He's an exciting guy.
Interesting. We got Craig's take on it. So we'll go back to Keith. You mentioned that we should see Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards. Something tells me it's probably not going to happen, so let's just say it's not going to happen. Who do you book Leon Edwards against next?
I think Ben Askren. I mean, he's hot. Ben Askren is a big trash talker. He'll pull the personality out of Edwards. Tyron Woodley is obviously a good test. But I just want to address something Craig says. He's saying Jorge Masvidal is really hot. So winning streak shouldn't matter. Who you beat shouldn't matter. Just how much you talk. Listen, who would Masvidal be? Would he have been a star if he didn't do the 3-piece in the soda? I mean, if he knocked out Darren Till and didn't punch Edwards afterwards, we wouldn't have been talking about him like that big. That elevated him. Assaulting Edwards elevated his star. Now, obviously, a flying knee knockout of Askren in 5 seconds brought it up even more. But listen, Look at Edwards. He can talk. Go back to the press conference with him when he was going after Darren Till and he was trash talking. And he actually was stealing the show when he was trash talking Darren Till, and Masvidal was being quiet in the corner. Remember that? The problem is you put him against RDA. No one trash talks RDA other than Conor because RDA is likable. He's a nice guy. Like, those guys don't get trash talked. Like, it's got to be two-way traffic. And you have that fight with Masvidal, and you can build Edwards because of Masvidal's star. So instead of having one star, now you'll have 2 stars, and you'll have a star in Britain, which you're lacking a star now that Michael Bisping's retired. So he can become the new Michael Bisping. And I'll say this, he's probably more talented than Michael Bisping, or at least more well-rounded. And he's young. He's like 26 or something. Like, he's really young.
I like how Keith took the follow-up and turned it into a rebuttal. With that being said, Craig Allen has just said, you know what? Officially rebuttal. Go ahead.
All right, so 2 key factors in this. So Keith said, what's the point of a 2-fight win streak when you're comparing it to an 8-fight win streak? And yes, I agree. Leon Edwards is super, super talented. I think he's a star in the making. And the UFC in general as a promotion needs to have a bigger push in not just Europe, but in the UK. They're missing out on a huge fan base. Bellator today announced their European series and their Dublin cards as 2 separate things, and they're just going full force in Europe right now. But as it stands, you got to think about that. 2-fight win streak versus an 8-fight win streak. And Keith, we talked about this before. What was Brock Lesnar's record when he fought for the UFC's heavyweight title? He was 2-1. So you compare that to a guy like Jorge Masvidal, who's captivating the internet and everyone. You got to give him the title shot. That just supersedes everything that's going on right now. And he's the one that deserves it over Leon Edwards. You also have to consider the fact that Leon Edwards and Jorge Masvidal had that clash after the Darren Till fight. What happened after that? He went out and had the quickest knockout in UFC history. So that just furthers my argument as to why you should have Masvidal fighting Usman. Masvidal is going to put butts in seats. Usman's also going to do it with just the sheer fact that he's one of the most athletic guys in the sport right now. And he's just such a performer. So it's a super fight, as it were, with Masvidal and Usman. You don't need to have Masvidal taking a step back and fighting Leon Edwards. It just doesn't make sense.
Keith, I am not going to allow this rebuttal right now. So, Nick, I'm going to follow back with you. You know, if it's not a Masvidal, who should Leon Edwards fight next?
I actually like the Tyron Woodley fight. I don't know if it makes all the sense in the world, but if you look at the rankings, and Tyron Woodley's coming off the one-sided title loss to Usman in March. He needs a bounce-back fight. If Edwards is able to win it, then that launches him right into the top 5 or even higher than that, right into a potential title shot. I don't think the Askren fight, I love Askren versus Edwards, but with one coming off a loss, one coming off a win, both of which were one-sided, I don't know if that makes the most sense. I like the Woodley fight. Welterweight, though, is stacked. There's a lot of options, but I would probably go Tyron Woodley.
That's an interesting matchup. Davidson, your thoughts on this?
The one that is probably the least likely to happen of like the proverbial few that have been thrown out there might be the one that intrigues me weirdly the most. I like the Ponzinibbio matchup quite a bit, even if likely it's not going to happen next and maybe not even the fight after that. The Ponzinibbio fight intrigues me. Ponzinibbio, a pressure fighter. Ponzinibbio, a guy that will look to get in his face for whether it's 15 or preferably 25 minutes. And it's not that Ponzinibbio's takedown defense is stellar. I think it's at about like a 6 or 7 to out of 10 type of clip, 60 or 70%, somewhere in that ballpark. So who is the one that has to back up of those two, like, guys coming onwards towards each other, that intrigues me probably the most. As far as what I think is going to happen, I think that he probably will fight Tyron Woodley next.
Keith, because I care about the ratings and because you and Craig are the 2 biggest stars of the show, I'm going to let you say what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to correct Craig again because, Craig, listen, I'm going to help you out because I like you. You're a nice dude. And, everyone likes Kenny, a nice dude. Listen, do not talk about the past, MMA, because you don't know jack shit about the past, dude. You're
talking history, about the past.
Okay, listen, your history is terrible. All right, so let's talk about, he says first of all, comparing Masvidal to Brock Lesnar is silly. Brock Lesnar came in already a megastar. He was the WWF, he was the biggest star in the WWF when he came over to MMA. Masvidal has 169 Twitter followers. Brock Lesnar has 1.37 million Twitter followers. That's like 10 times more. This is a guy, he has 10 times more Twitter followers. He has 154 tweets total. The guy doesn't even own a cell phone, and he's 10 times more popular than Jorge Masvidal. Okay, but why? Why did Brock Lesnar, besides his popularity, why did he get the fight? Well, let me give you a little quick history lesson. Randy Couture was holding out, wanted the Fedor fight. He held out. They made an interim title with Frank Mir and Antonio Nogueira. However, while that fight was already booked, Randy Couture and the UFC settled. They needed a fight really, really, really quick. So they threw in the fight actually happened before the interim title fight. It was already booked. And they put Couture against Lesnar. And Couture requested Lesnar. So, because he wanted a big fight. And he was like, it was promised to him, oh, you don't get Fedor. Hey, we'll give you the next best thing. How about Brock Lesnar? And Couture overlooked him and thought he'd win that fight.
Eric Bischoff, since we're talking pro wrestling from WCW, wrote a book called Controversy Creates Cash. And in this sense, controversy does not always create points. So after round number 1, we have Nick Baldwin with 10, Davidson, Keith, and Craig all with 9. As we head to question number 2, let's talk Greg Hardy. You knew this was coming at some point. And maybe you don't see this because we were talking off air, and I don't think people see this as much as I do. But what I think has been really interesting about Greg Hardy is when he fought in Brooklyn, everybody was talking about Greg Hardy fighting in Brooklyn. You know, you could say that he was on the fight with fight card with Ostovich or whatever. Everybody was talking about Greg Hardy being on the card, even more so than the main event. Probably until Alex Hernandez got onto the stage at the press conference, started talking about Donald Cerrone being geriatric, and then everything changed in terms of what people wanted to see. Hardy and Alan Crowder was that fight, and then it wasn't anymore. Heading into this next 2 fights, yeah, people were talking about it, like, yeah, Greg Hardy's gonna be on the card, but not to the level we were back in January. Hardy fights Juan Adams, finishes him in a matter of seconds. And the interesting thing is, as soon as the Greg Hardy fight ends, then we're talking about him again all over the place. Everything comes up, his past, the allegations, everything, which I understand. That's always going to be with him. But anyways, after that quick win over a guy everyone thought was the big step up in competition, I guess my question is, where does Greg Hardy go from his win over Juan Adams? Can we start throwing these bigger names out there, like these guys who have headlines events in the past against Greg Hardy? And also, can he be a big draw for that division, considering, since we're talking pro wrestling a little bit, he may actually be the biggest heel in MMA right now? Nick, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate to say it, but Greg Hardy could be a star. He could be. He brings over some sort of audience from the NFL world. I don't know. I assume that's all the NFL fans that want to see him get beat up by an MMA fighter that aren't really familiar with MMA, I'm guessing. And then you have the MMA world that, I mean, we know about his past. We know his story. And a lot of the MMA fans want to see him get beat up as well. So I do think if he keeps on winning fights, and I picked Juan Adams. He was the betting favorite going to the fight, or close to it anyways. I thought Juan would be too much for him, too skilled for Greg Hardy, too much experience. And I was wrong, and a lot of us were wrong. So if he keeps getting these step ups and keeps coming out 45-second KOs or even just some sort of win, yeah, I mean, he's clearly talented. He has some sort of skill for this sport, and so if he keeps winning, he could be a star. As far as what is next right away for Greg Hardy, I do think you start giving him a step up in competition, because that's what we had with Juan Adams. It didn't look like that in the cage, but that was a step up from Dmitry Smolyakov. I can assure you of that. And so I actually like the Walt Harris fight. Harris was on the card, so time frame it lines up well. Some people will say that that's way too big of a step up right now for Greg Hardy. I say, well, if it is, then Greg Hardy loses and we're all happy. And even if you for some reason want Greg Hardy to win, then losses aren't everything in the sport. And so he can bounce back from that. So I don't think you feed him to the wolves to the top 5 right away, but I think Walt Harris is a fine step up. Keith, what do you think?
Well, first of all, Walt Harris was asked about the fight, and he said that they train together, they're boys, they're good buddies. He doesn't want that fight, so it's not going to happen. Could Greg Hardy be a star? Of course, Greg Hardy be a star. I mean, look at SportsCenter this week. When they talked about the UFC, it actually led with Greg Hardy, and that was the head. It was Greg Hardy, then it was the rest of the fights. It's who casual fans are talking about. I mean, you want a perfect example of casual fans? Look at Kyle Steele or Fred Kirby. Look at their show. Who are they talking about? Greg Hardy and casual fans. Listen, look what a guy like Matt Mitrione and Brandon Schaub, two guys that was played in the NFL or played on the practice squad. How their athleticism, how far they went early in their career before Mitch Rollins' seasons now, but early in his career, how far he went. Now take a guy like Greg Hardy, who was a All-Pro, a top 10 player in the NFL in his prime. And the guy's only 30 years old. He's got insane power. He's training with the best team in the world. And he besides that, he really needs to go, what Nick was saying, he's a big villain. He needs to go full villain. Jon Jones became a big star when Jones stopped pretending to be like, Ned Flanders and talking about Jesus all the time and stopped being like, hey, yeah, man, I drank. Yeah, I did coke. Like, it's cool. Like, that's what Greg Hardy should do. He should taunt his opponents when he knocks them out. He should refuse to take pictures with children. He should go there. But that's what Brock Lesnar did, and how big of a star was he? Listen, love him, hate him. I mean, the guy's a scumbag and all this, but people talk about him. I mean, we knew we were going to talk about him, and he starts knocking out, and he starts headlining UFC cards, which is coming a lot sooner than you think. Yeah, and you know something crazy? He's at the age where, he's still new to. Between his athleticism, his power, and his age,
seconds.
And especially being at heavyweight, this guy could win a title one day. Like, I actually believe it could happen.
Craig Allen, your thoughts on this?
I don't know who Keith thinks he should fight next, honestly, after that response. But I do agree with Keith in a lot of the major points that he just made. Greg Hardy's an MMA star in the making, if he's not a star already. He is a star already. I mean, you look at him, he's already co-main evented. He just had a spot in San Antonio, Texas, and he played for America's team, the Cowboys. There were cheers, there were boos. This guy was an all-pro at 25 years old. He's only 30. He's got another 10 to 12 years as a professional mixed martial artist, barring some crazy knockout or finish where he's not able to come back from it. So if you think of a fight that makes sense for him, you could throw the Cyril Ascares, the Christian Columbos, the Chris De La Rocas, the Anthony Freight Train Hamilton if he was still in the UFC. You could throw him all sorts of guys like that. But that's not the type of talk that was going on today. ESPN led off with Greg Hardy. I was listening to morning shows on Sirius XM. Nobody talked about Leon Edwards and RDA. It was all about Greg Hardy and this what did they call him? A tomato can that he fought in Juan Adams, who we all knew was a good fighter. Nick picked him to win. I mean, Juan Adams is legit. You look at somebody that he should take on next. You want to capitalize on this as Greg Hardy, the villain. Put him up against somebody that hardcores know. Maybe casual fans don't know, but the guy has a good record. It's El Guapo, and it's not the El Guapo that you're thinking of. It's not Boss Rutan. Put him up against season 28 Ultimate Fighter winner Juan Espino. The guy's 9-1. He has all sorts of finish wins. Where's Juan Espino been? I want to see Juan Espino. Put him up against Greg Hardy. The guy, he's a Spaniard, so his English might not be totally great, but you can sell that fight. Juan Espino knocks the Spaniard back to Europe. There's your fight.
I thought you meant Rich Garces from the Boston Red Sox, but I digress. Davidson, your thoughts on this?
Before I get into any of my personal opinions, I will say that Juan Espino was on my list of good ideas. Is it who I would make for if the UFC continued to go on the path they're going with, like the somewhat conservative matchmaking that they have depicted thus far with Greg? No. However, I don't think Juan Espino is a bad idea. First off, here's the thing. Just like Craig, I agree with a lot of things Keith said, but I disagree, honestly, with the larger premise of this question, and that is that he is the biggest heel in MMA. I don't even know if the guy's the biggest heel in his own division. I don't even know if the guy was the biggest heel in the two men fighting each other in his respective matchup. It was Juan Adams that said everything he had to say. It was sure if Greg Hardy's past and Greg Hardy's indiscretions or whatever is gifted to Greg Hardy as a result of being a former All-Pro defensive end makes him a heel, then maybe the definition of heel is somewhat misconstrued to me. I thought Juan Adams was the person that was antagonizing him all week. I thought Greg Hardy did a great job deflecting it. And while, like Craig said, I did agree with a lot of things that Keith had to say in his point, the one thing I completely disagree with is do not go full villain. Do not go full heel. Keep doing what you're doing, because on the surface of things, and when you do scratch the surface of things, he has changed at least somewhat, or is attempting to as a person, and it's working for now. And as far as who I think he should fight next, give him Adam Wieczorek. And then if he wins that, give him a top 15.
Here's what I find interesting about Greg Hardy. I kind of like this Greg Hardy where he's like trying to say the right thing. But if you actually look into it, Keith, I will give you your opportunity for God's sakes. Good Lord. I'm coming back to a couple of you guys. But what's interesting about Hardy is when he gives those answers, you look in his eyes, he looks like he's going to murder every media member standing in front of him. So like those tendencies, those murderous type tendencies are there, but he's trying to like hold it off. It's like American Psycho. That's like what Greg Hardy reminds me of. But Keith, yes, you did not get to choose who he's going to fight next. So please tell us who you would like to fight next.
Well, I'd like to fight Mike. I like to have to fight you because, I mean, we have this chat going. I'm saying, hey, am I going to get my pick? Am I going to get my pick?
Yeah.
You could have put okay, so I know I'm going to.
I'm in the middle of it. I have to hear what you guys have to say before you bitch about my judging. So go ahead.
He listens to what Davidson has to say. He's talking about Adam Wishorik and Juan Espino, and we got guys calling out his teammates. It's like, listen, we're none of us are matchmakers, so let's just do a fun one that's probably never going to happen because Juan Espino's never happened. Bring back Travis Brown. That's the fight to make. You got the two domestic violence guys. You got two big names. You got Ronda Rousey in Travis Brown's corner. I don't know. You get some hoe in Greg Hardy's corner. Do it up. Have him trash talk. It'd be fantastic. And honestly, here's the funny thing is he's a big name. And at this point in Travis Brown's career and Greg Hardy, I don't know who would become the favorite, which makes an interesting matchup. I'm sure it's never going to happen, but that's the fight to make. Greg Hardy, bring back Travis Brown.
Nick, since Walt Harris is kind of out of the question, who would you say?
I actually like the Travis Brown fight, Keith. I do like that matchup because, as you said, I don't know. I mean, Brown could win. Hardy could just catch him. So I like that fight. I'm trying to think who's at the bottom. Maurice Green. That would be an interesting matchup because maybe we would see Hardy on the ground, which I would like to see. And not because I want to see him get mauled. I mean, that's part of it, but I want to see can he hang on the ground as well. I also if Todd Duffy beats Jeff Hughes in Vancouver, what about Todd Duffy? I like that fight too. So either of those matchups.
Some exciting stuff. I actually like the Derek Lewis conversation. I think that would be a fun one as well. There's already some rift between those two guys. I like that matchup as well. So we have 19 apiece for Nick and Keith, 18 apiece for Craig and Davidson. As we move on to the third question, as we take a look at one of the losing fighters on Saturday night, one of the more fascinating matchups in San Antonio, as Craig Allen stated so eloquently in the finals of last week when he defeated Keith, by the way, was Dan Hooker versus James Vick. Now, Dan Hooker, in my opinion, saved the entire fight card, picking up the first finish of the night after 9 consecutive decisions, mind you. Big win for Dan Hooker. Another tough loss for James Vick. So I guess my question is, from where you guys sit here in the panel, what is happening with James Vick? I mean, this is a guy that was on a really impressive winning streak to 3 straight losses. This is the weight cut. Does he need to change things up from a training camp perspective? Was the knockout at the hands of Justin Gaethje that devastating? Like, what have you seen from James Vick over these last 3 fights, Keith?
Well, this is a guy there who's on a big long win streak. He kept calling for a top 10 opponent. He finally got it. That's what happened to him. He took a step up in competition. He got smashed by Gaethje, Felder. Who was the last one? Daniel Hooker, 3 studs. Listen, prior to that, the last time he had a big step on competition, he went against Beneil Dariush a couple years back, and he got knocked out by him too. Listen, he just took a step up in competition. That's it. I mean, I'll keep saying it. Before that, what's his biggest wins? 87-year-old Francisco Trinaldo in a fight that he actually lost the 3rd round, or Joseph Duffy, who's best known for beating Conor McGregor before Nick was even born. I mean, listen, should he move up to welterweight? Yeah, he should move up to welterweight, not because he lost, because if you cut a lot of weight, that's going to diminish you no matter what. I'll say that. You ask me if someone should move up, my answer is pretty much going to always be yes. Now, I think what he should really do is hold on, let me go back. I know he likes talking about, he likes being tallest, largest. I already looked at the top 15 rankings at welterweight. He's taller than every single person in the division, except for one, Neil Magny, and they're the same height. So, I mean, the size difference is not going to make a big deal for him moving up. Now, what he should do is leave Team Lloyd Irvin. It's a terrible team. Lloyd Irvin, if you don't know about him, he's a terrible person. I mean, this guy has raped girls. I mean, he makes Greg Hardy seem like a freaking good person. He should. I mean, this guy's from Texas. Why don't you go with like the hottest team in MMA? Go with Fortis MMA. Go down. I mean, they're just. I mean, look what they're doing with raw talent. But imagine what they could do with someone like James Vick. Maybe go up north, work with like a Duke Rufus, a kickboxing expert to work in the head movement. Shit, if you need head movement, go over to Edmund Taverdian. He'll help you with head movement. Whatever you do, you got to leave Team Lloyd Irvin. That's his biggest issue.
Craig, what do you think?
I mean, the guy's got a young family, and I can't just take him like on Google Earth and pick him up and put him somewhere else in the country or the continent or even the world. But Keith makes a really good point. I mean, you look at a team that's owned by Darren Williams, Jazz legend, Nets legend, Dallas Mavericks legend, and you look at, the head coach that they have is doing a perfect job at Fortis MMA. And if you don't want to go there, you could go to Heavy Head Hitters in Cleveland. You could go to Blood and Ashes in Austin, or you could go to Big Head MMA in Lubbock. I mean, great names for MMA gyms. Texas has a plenty. So you could go to all sorts of different places, but the best place to go, of course, is Fortis MMA. It's the biggest rising gym in just mixed martial arts right now. I mean, apart from TriStar, which is already a big, big name, ATT, Hard Knocks, you already know these gyms. Fortis is the up-and-comer, and Keith made a perfect point when he said raw talent. You look at guys like Hands of Steel, Jeff Neal, Carlos Diego Ferreira, Charles Bird. These are up-and-coming UFC talents, and the fact that, hey, a world champion also kind of trains there part-time in Kamaru Usman is a perfect reason why you should move up to 170 pounds and go to Fortis MMA and learn from those guys. I mean, there's nothing to lose, and you're training right now with Lloyd Irvin, who his background's in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Do you really see James Vick using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I understand he has a great ground game, and he's a really tall guy, but the guy has a hard time checking leg kicks. So go to a striking camp, go to a camp with a bunch of guys that are in the similar size range, go to Fortis MMA.
I love Craig's use of the word Lubbock as Lubick. Beautifully done. Geographically.
Mike, if I may, what did everybody call the small city in New Brunswick, Canada, when we had a fight card? Moncton, New Brunswick? Nobody knew what Moncton was called. So give me a little bit of a break.
I laughed. It was funny. I'm not making fun of you. It's like naming a Massachusetts city. There's so many of them that everyone gets wrong. Davidson, your thoughts on James Vick?
My thoughts in regard to a question that has answers that are so universally obvious that it is literally impossible, no matter how hard it is, to disagree with. I mean, a single syllable either of these previous two guys just said. But it is just that. It's hard to disagree with literally anything they just said. And I'll even piggyback off of Craig Allen's point further. Part of the reason why you don't see gyms continue to remain as prominent or as a unit or as a total sample size is because of the factor that what happens when the new age or the new era or the new breed comes in. Fortis MMA, piggyback on top of that. The Contender Series might be the hottest thing in MMA right now. Enzo Chukwu, Alonzo Menafield, Miles Johns, add those three guys. James Vick could benefit a lot from going there. And Keith hit it right on the nail with the competition things. What do all of these wins from James Vick have in common? Abel Trujillo, Marco Polo Reyes, Joe Duffy, Francisco Trinaldo, all coming off a loss. What do all of his losses have in common? Gaethje, Felder, Hooker, Dariush, they're all coming off a win. Even go back to when he was in the Tough House. The writing was on the wall there. Chiesa, only guy he fought on Tough that's coming off a win. All the guys he beat, or the only guy that beat him on Tough that's coming off a win. Only guys he beat on Tough, how about Dakota Cochran, Darren Cruikshank, and Joe Proctor? The guy really, Keith could have just concluded his entire point right there because it's really that evident. He can't just get over that hump when he reaches that top 10, top 15 summit. And moving up to 170, even though he is going to be taller than everybody, still, I don't know, man. I mean, how good really is he? I think we've already got our answer.
Nick, I talked to James heading into that fight, and and I'm sure you've interviewed him at some points as well. One of the things he always puts across when he talks is that he hasn't been in the sport long. There's a lot of guys who have been training for 10, 12, 15 years longer than James Vick has. So in a strange way, even though he's had this run with the UFC for all these years, he still feels like he's green. He still feels like he's a rookie compared to a lot of these guys. Is it that simple? Is it just like he still needs more time to develop at this point? Or is that time kind of past? Time to really start changing things up at this point?
I mean, I think that developmental time for Vick was 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, anybody that is looking at his current, past 3 fights, past 4 fights, he's on the decline. And I don't necessarily think Vick's declining, but that's just what it looks like. So he's definitely not a blue chip prospect who's 8-0, coming off Contender Series, coming off tough. The ceiling isn't the sky for James Vick at this point. I mean, he's maybe without a doubt a loss away from getting cut from the UFC, and so I think it is time to change things up. I think the biggest issue is probably the weight cut. He looks like death on the scale. Just move up to 170. 155 is an insane division. I'm not saying anything we don't know there. 170 is very good too, but hey, it is a little bit shallower than lightweight. So just based on that, he should do better at welterweight. Not having to cut those extra 15 pounds will absolutely help. But maybe even a bigger issue than the weight cut is everyone around him is getting better, and James Vick seems not to be. MMA always evolves. Fighters are always getting better. If you compare 2009 UFC to 2019 UFC, it is entirely different. It is not the same sport. So if James Vick all of a sudden, for some reason, hits a wall, doesn't keep improving, everyone else in the lightweight division is, that's what we have here. And so he needs to go to a different gym. He needs to tighten up the holes on the feet, move, better head movement, keep his glove, keep his hands a bit higher, different techniques on the feet. He needs to get better, or else he's not going to be in the UFC for much longer.
Yeah, Fortis MMA makes way too much sense at this point. I mean, he lives right in the Fort Worth area. It's not that far from Dallas. It's probably a 35, 40-minute ride, probably an hour with the horrible traffic that takes place in Texas. So I think that's an absolute no-brainer at this point. We got 28s across the board as we head into the fourth question. Then we're going to say goodbye to one of these great competitors. Let's talk about the story of the day in mixed martial arts. Jon Jones back in the news, and not for a good reason, as you would expect if you haven't heard the story. He has been accused of battery against a cocktail waitress, and I believe, let me just pull this up. Let's just to read it from the ESPN article. He is accused of slapping a cocktail waitress in her genital area at a strip club, pulling her down to his lap and kissing her neck. The woman told Albuquerque police that Jones put her in a chokehold and picked her up off the ground per the news station. When she asked Jones to stop, she said Jones continued touching her until he decided to leave. The charge was listed in court records as a petty misdemeanor, but a conviction can still carry jail time. KRQE Television in Albuquerque was the first to report this news. Now, as you would expect, Jon Jones and his team denied the charges. A fine apparently was paid, and we'll see what happens from here. But man, good, bad, and different. When you hear a story like this has got to be the absolute worst thing that could have happened to Jon Jones. I mean, I don't believe this. So I guess the question that was laid out, I'm going to kind of change a little bit. So Craig Allen, I'm going to start with you. With all this happening, when you hear that Jon Jones is involved in this incident, how did you react to it?
Okay, so I said it in my intro. First thing, I wake up, Nick Baldwin, Jon Jones. So I click on the article. You brought up a good point. There's one key factor that's missing. Witnesses on the scene corroborated Jones' story. Who were those witnesses? Who's one of those witnesses? Chandler Jones. Who's Chandler Jones? Jon Jones' brother. I mean, of course he's going to corroborate that story. So to go back on it a little bit, the easy answer is this the worst thing that could happen to Jon Jones? Not at all. I mean, he's got a DUI. He had the 2015 hit and run incident. Listen, I'm set to graduate from UNB, the University of New Brunswick, in October. And I'm kind of a businessman similar to Eric Gordon from Billy Madison. You remember him? Ooh, he's going to be a soccer player. So that's why I was wearing the jersey tonight. The reason being, I got a C in ethics. I got an A in business law. So I don't understand business ethics. That's the end of the movie. I do understand that you can't do things like Jon Jones has done in his career. And realistically, this guy's ethics and his moral compass is way, way off. You'd think his team would try and help him out. Rather, they're corroborating a story that he had about an alleged assault that happened this spring. The guy had a fight after this. Like, are we going to focus on that? No, we haven't at all. So realistically, is this the worst thing that could have happened? There were bad things that happened this weekend that a lot of people just glossed over. The homophobic slur that Andrei Arlovsky tossed out there. We're not really talking about that today, but we're talking about Jon Jones. Is it the worst thing that could happen? No. He's going to have another title defense in 2019. This one's going to go under the rug, and we're going to forget about this in a couple of months. And we shouldn't, but we will.
Interesting. Davidson Baker, how did you react to this news, and how bad is this for Jon Jones and I guess the way people view him at this point?
I reacted about as polar opposite as one of, if not one of the last of the few of your statements in the question, which was when you said, I can't believe it. You know, sadly, I really could believe it. And it was just a matter of just past indiscretions, man. We all know the term that in the definition of insanity is, repeatedly going through the same thing and expecting a different result, I mean, we build the guy back up, and the UFC in particular builds the guy back up because obviously, as far as the books and the end of the day, dollars and cents figures are concerned, he's important. And he's important to that, and that's become evident time and time again. But as far as could this be the worst thing to happen to Jon, I agree with Craig as well. No, until one of two things happens. One, everybody knows that once video comes out, it becomes a different story. Ray Rice, for example, NFL, blackballed from the NFL after video came out from him. Joe Mixon is a running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, and he didn't have video come out at the promptu time, and he's still in the league. Sure, a small example and maybe not the best analogy, but what I'm saying is when there's hardcore evidence for people to retweet in today's day of social media, repost, republish, put out there, have their own opinion about it, it becomes a very dangerous game you try to play. And unfortunately, nobody looks good. Not Jon, not the accusing party, not anybody looks good until any type of tangible evidence comes out showing proof of whether it did or did not take place.
I guess part of what I'm asking here, Nick, when it comes to Jon Jones is, I mean, no matter what comes out about Jon Jones at this point, like he has his people that unless he like murders somebody at this point, they're going to stand behind Jon Jones. But a lot of people, are on the outside looking in at Jon Jones. They're like, oh, here we go again. How many chances are we going to give this guy? Blah, 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 blah. But then as time goes on and he fights and has performances and have wins, for some reason, like Tiger Woods, winning changes everything for Jon Jones. As he's starting to kind of turn the corner in the public eye, despite all the terrible things he has done, this has now come out against him. So your thoughts on everything, you wrote about it. So how did you react to it? And, how bad is this for Jon Jones?
Well, I was sitting on my couch, probably about to go to sleep in 10 minutes or so from that moment. And then, of course, it pops up on my Twitter feed. I'm like, okay, well, of course this happened. Duh. Like, there was no surprise. This was, here we go again. I was, as you said, Mike, I mean, we were starting to get to the point just a little bit where maybe Jon Jones, he just had his 32nd birthday. He's not a kid anymore. Maybe he's finally getting to that point where he can be an adult. He can go to a bar or a strip club and not get in trouble. That's not that hard to do. I mean, if you go to bars and constantly get into fights, that's your problem. That's not something, the bar is doing or someone else is doing. There are easy ways to avoid that. And so I thought Jon Jones was starting to turn the corner, become an adult, but I guess he can't control himself. I guess it's just not the way he's going to work his life. When I saw this, it was kind of one of those things. Okay, here we go again. As I said, I thought he was starting to turn the corner. All these fights, he finally has been putting together title defenses. He's the champion again. But this is the story of Jon Jones. He's the best fighter we've ever seen, if not the best, one of the best for sure. He'll go down as one of the GOATs, but there's always going to be this controversy. And if he's still, he did it in 2012 with the DWI. He's doing it 7 years later. It's not going to stop. So, yeah.
Keith, what do you think, my man?
Well, is it the worst thing that can happen to him? No. I mean, he could be shipped off to Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, and have to fight on that card. Listen, I've been there. Here's my souvenir from there proving Hopewell Rock's a big thing. That city sucks. Anyways, no, the worst thing that can happen to Jon Jones is that he gets caught with some type of PEDs and USADA suspension. He gets a lifetime ban. That's the worst thing that could happen to Jon Jones. There's really two ways to look at this. You can either believe him or you can't. But listen, there was an arrest warrant out for him, which means that they were going to make an arrest, which means there is enough probable cause. Probable cause means that basically a police officer believes that it's more probable that it did happen than it didn't happen. Okay, now that said, she claims that he picked her up and choked her and she was crying and she was screaming and all this stuff. No bouncer breaks it up. No witnesses see this. It's 2019. Someone doesn't get this on a camera phone. This supposedly happened in like April. No one got this on Twitter on a camera phone. Nobody got this on a surveillance camera. That makes me a little worried. But I want to address something Nick said. Nick says that you can't get in trouble at a strip club. Nick, You're too young to ever go to a strip club. Many marriages have been broken at a strip club. There's tons of alcohol. This is the man who got in trouble with a DUI. You know what else is there? Cocaine is everywhere at strip clubs. This is the man that snorts cocaine. He admits it. He likes it. Jon Jones has been fighting 3 times since December. It's like we're finally getting used to him being back. We're like, oh my God, we're finally going to see Jon Jones again. I am so worried about this guy that he is dumb enough to go to a scenario like this with his NFL brothers. Like, that's always a good thing. Go to a strip club with a lot of money with NFL players. Like, that's never gotten anybody in trouble before. I'm really worried. I think he's going to screw up really bad. And I want to address something where people said, oh, the UFC, has been protecting him and it's on his side. Dude, we're talking about Dana White and the UFC. They prance out Mike Tyson, a convicted rapist, not an arrested, not someone to be allocated for rape, but convicted in court for rape. And they make him seem like he's a spokesperson and like a good role model. I mean, give me a break.
All right. Jon Jones gets in trouble again, and we're talking about it here on Between the Links. And unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to one of these great competitors. So moving on to the final question before we get to the finals will be Davidson Baker, will be Nick Baldwin, and Keith Schillen will move on. Craig Allen, very close, probably like a 10th of a point, got you out of this game. Any parting words for the fans and for your fellow Canadian brethren?
Sometimes you can be a slap hitter. You don't have to hit home runs every time. I mean, I did think that I hit him out of the park the first few, and sometimes you win shows and then you're the first one out. So hopefully next week I have a better showing. But good luck to Nick, man. Hopefully you beat Davidson. That's an easy one. But yeah, go hard on Keith.
You're the Wade Boggs of Between the Links, Craig. You should be proud of that. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back on the show next week. Love Craig Allen. His personality's really been shining on this program. As we head to the final question, regulation, we've been talking about UFC San Antonio. We've been talking about Jon Jones. Now we talk about this Saturday, UFC 240 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Not the deepest card on earth, but a very fun card, a very good main event. So my question is, because you know how much I love talking storylines, it's the old school professional wrestling fan in me. We're not looking for the biggest fight because it's pretty obvious what that is, but what is the biggest storyline? What is the biggest question you're fascinated to know the answer to on Saturday night? We're going to start with Davidson Baker.
Took me off guard on that one. Didn't think you would start with me. Well, what is there to say about this card? Here's a couple things that I noticed when looking down it and kind of dissecting it from top to bottom. Get past the whole Max Holloway 4-1 favorite, Cyborg 7-1 favorite. That's your main and co-main tandem. You get past that. And whether David Shaw, who for those who somehow don't know is like the guy in charge of international everything for the UFC, and if maybe the message didn't get like relayed to them that this is a pay-per-view, this looks like a fight night in every sense of the imagination. And here's why I say that. If you take out the main event, Jeff Neal and Nico Price, and the flyweight fight between Pantoja and Figueiredo, every other fight on this entire card, that's 9 fights out of 12, have either 2 debutants, 2 newcomers fighting each other, or at least one fighter of the 2 coming off of their debut or making their debut. This is a fight night-esque type of card that they made for this pay-per-view. Whether they couldn't get the names that they wanted to on it, regardless, if you're a hardcore, you'll love the stylistic matchup that Neil Price, maybe Alban Mercier and Arman Sarukian give you. Maybe intrigued a little bit by whether Vivi Araujo can make some noise at 125. Other than that, have fun watching Giacomo Lemos and Tanner Bozier, and let me know how you felt about that one when it's over.
Man, Davis is getting fired up here. Nick Baldwin, what is your biggest storyline heading into Saturday night's UFC 240 event?
I think the biggest storyline surrounds Chris Cyborg, and there's 2 main reasons. One, she's obviously coming off the first brutal loss, the first loss of her career when the real Chris Cyborg, of course, she lost very early on in her career, but doesn't really count. She's coming off a one-sided brutal loss to Amanda Nunes last December, and I'm very interested to see, is this the same Chris Cyborg? Is this the former UFC and Invicta featherweight champion that brutalized fighters not really in her league? prior to meeting Amanda Nunes? I don't really know. I mean, some fighters can bounce back from brutal defeats a lot better than others, just mentally or physically. I don't know the specifics and why exactly, but look at Henan Brow. He got knocked out and destroyed by TJ Dillashaw, never the same. Anthony Pettis, he's bounced back over time, but took a while after that one-sided defeat to RDA. So does Chris Cyborg come back the same fighter? I would imagine so, but we don't know that. We have to see her fight Felicia Spencer to really have to be able to say whether or not it's the same Chris Cyborg. Now, 2 is that this is the last fight on her current UFC contract, and she has a good relationship with former Strikeforce head and current Bellator president Scott Coker. She even tweeted when Julia Budd, the Bellator featherweight champion, defended her title a couple weeks back. She said Bellator has a deeper featherweight division than the UFC. All signs to me indicate that this could be Chris Cyborg's last UFC fight, win or lose, and she's headed off to Bellator after this. Nothing official, and we won't know until after the fight, win or lose, but I suspect this could be her last one. So I'm interested to see how mentally that sort of plays into the fight, and I'm just interested to see after the fight where she goes.
To add to that too, this is a must-win for her. It's a free agent fight. She has to win. She has to win. And she always has that name that's synonymous, and Bellator is like a perfect place for someone with a big name that's been around the sport for a long time. But if you want that big money, you want people to pay you millions and millions of dollars per fight, you have to win. You have to be Felicia Spencer. If you don't beat Felicia Spencer, you're not going to get that big money, and you lose out on a lot of different opportunities. Keith, what's your biggest storyline heading into Saturday night?
Well, first of all, I don't know what the hell Davison was talking about. This is the first card with a debuting fighter coming off a loss, training in Canada, puts pineapples on pizza, watches Joe Rogan. I mean, what the hell is he talking? He's just rambling. Listen, this is a pay-per-view card, and it is terrible. Let's just get – I mean, no one say it. I think you said it was not deep, but it was fun. This card is so terrible, we're finally talking about it. We're on our 5th question. It got pushed behind James Vick talk, for Christ's sake. The best fight on the card is Alexandra Pantoja and David Figueiredo, and that's on the prelims. Nick finally said something right the whole card. It's all about Cyborg this weekend. Besides coming off a loss, this is the first time she enters a fight where she doesn't seem invincible. I mean, because she had this aura about, like, scariest woman because she beat dudes and stuff. And if she loses, which actually could be a good thing for the UFC with her going to free agency, if she loses, you just made a star undefeated in Felicia Spencer. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, I think she gets some tits beat off. But then the question is, if she wins, and if she wins by knockout in this great, Chris Cyborg 30-second knockout, what is she going to do? Where's she going to go? Will this be the last time we see her in the UFC? What will the UFC do with post-fight press conferences with her? All this stuff she's not signed. I asked Scott Coker, I was the one who asked him about, hey, would you be interested in Cyborg? She only had one fight. He says he's very interested. Like Nick said, she's been tweeting about it. Rising would make sense, being with her friendship with Gabby Garcia. Maybe she'll go that route. Maybe one championship, she'll go there because, I mean, they're signing, all the big American stars. They're opening up an office in America, trying to push that. You got a big star in Chris Cyborg. We know she won't go to bare knuckle boxing because she isn't old enough and she has too much talent for that. But hey, maybe here's the one that I think, maybe she leaves MMA altogether and she finally goes to the WWE, who she showed interest in, could be her. And think about this. She could be the 2019 version of China. Remember China was like fighting guys? That could be Chris Cyborg in the WWE. I think that's where she goes, WWE.
Wouldn't surprise me. I would go there. I would definitely go there. Millions and millions of dollars, less dates, much easier work. Just ask Brock Lesnar. That's why Brock Lesnar's not back in the UFC, and amongst other things. Davison Baker, on the final question of regulation, has decided to invoke his rebuttal. Go right ahead.
So many questions, but I have to narrow it down to a couple. My friend Keith said maybe Chris Cyborg looks at the possibility of signing one championship just before, potentially by the transitive property, implying that because there's no one to fight for her in one championship, maybe she should fight men. I didn't say that that's what he said, but by the transitive property, it sounded like that was connected. So how about that Chris Cyborg versus Martin Wynn fight? Or how about that Chris Cyborg versus Bibiano Fernandez fight? Or how about this? The WWE is a good idea, don't get me wrong. But you also, at the very beginning of your point, completely further emphasized my point by talking about how garbage the card is. That's my whole point. The card is not great. The card is not good. The card is not to pay-per-view standard. Are we going to watch it as hardcores? Yes. Not one of us have even said a word about the main event. Not one of us have even mentioned a word about it, like really in this conversation. I think that says a lot of things. And I would like to thank you, Keith, for further emphasizing my point. Thank you.
Okay.
There's not a single listener out there that understand what the hell he was talking about, transitive property and all this. Dude, Davison, do us all a favor.
Pick up a math book.
Just math book? Okay, that's that. That's what if we want people to watch the show, they should have pull up a math book.
I don't know what to say about this. I don't know what to say. As we head into the finals, as the show is just taking a nosedive into just the pits of hell at this point, Nick Baldwin makes it to the finals, and he will be taking on he's going to take on Keith Schillen in the finals. Davidson had a good run. It was a tough one in the last question. I think just the placement of it and having you go first threw you off enough to have you lose by a couple of decimal points there. Any final words for the folks, Mr. Baker?
No. Just remember reading is important, kids.
Touche. Thank you, Davidson.
You too.
Davidson Baker, just getting better and better every week. Doing a nice job on the show. You can find him all over the place. Cage Side Press, Fansided, so forth and so on. So we got Nick Baldwin taking on Keith Schillen. Keith Schillen is just like finding his way to the finals. He's like the Buffalo Bills of Between the Links. But before we get to the finals, let us talk about the great network that is the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and get all these shows immediately upon release. Not only do you get this fantastic show, but you get the Not Safe for Word podcast with Kyle and Fred. It is phenomenal. It is hilarious. And Fred Kirby might be the greatest, co-host in podcasting history at this point for MMA. He is just so ridiculous. The things that come out of his mouth, it's unreal. So make sure you check out that show. You get the breakdown shows with Marcel and Max. Those are fantastic. I'm sure they're going to have one coming up either on Thursday or Friday to preview UFC 240. We have the Sunday Morning Cornerman with Keith and with John Franklin, one of the newest podcasts on the platform, so make sure you check that out. And then whenever it happens, MMA Yesterday. Keith, maybe give us an update on that. Is that going to be happening again?
Well, I'll just say this without throwing any on the bus. Me and Kyle both do the show, and one of us hasn't been doing it, and you guys can figure out who that is.
Okay. So when Keith's ready to do it, it'll be back. So, but anyways, you never know when it's going to come back. So make sure you subscribe to the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever it is you find your favorite podcast. The same one you are listening to this podcast right now as we head to the finals. UFC 240 coming up this weekend. And as Davidson Baker just said, we didn't talk about the main event at all. We have a phenomenal main event between Max Holloway defending the UFC featherweight title against Frankie Edgar. And I have to tell you that as a fan of the sport, as someone who has been waiting for a certain fight to happen for years and years, this is one of those fights where I'm like, man, I cannot wait for the day where Max Holloway fights Frankie Edgar, because I'm just so fascinated by this fight, because the two guys are just so tough. Frankie Edgar's such a bull, and once that fight gets to the fifth round, if it's close, that's when things are going to get just really fun. I don't know what's going to happen if it gets to that point. But anyways, let's just say in this crazy world of mixed martial arts that Frankie Edgar goes into Edmonton and beats Max Holloway to become the UFC featherweight champion. Then we start to put him in a place on the all-time greats list. Where does he go? Who is he ahead of? Who is he not ahead of? So we're going to start with you, Keith Schillen. If Frankie Edgar beats Max Holloway to win the UFC featherweight title, where does he rank on the all-time list?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's that crazy. Well, I'm picking Max Holloway, and Frankie Edgar entered this fight as a plus 300 favorite. When he won the UFC lightweight title against BJ Penn, he was a plus 590 underdog. So, I mean, don't count this guy out that much. I mean, he's proven that he can do it before. Where would he? He'd be top 10 for sure, possibly top 5. I mean, think about this. These guys, like, probably 20-something wins in his UFC career. He would be a champion of 2 divisions, of being lightweight and featherweight. But the most impressive thing is he'd be the champion of 2 divisions that he probably has no right to fighting for. He probably should be fighting at bantamweight, how small he is. I mean, just look at the list of guys this guy's beaten. He's beaten BJ Penn twice. He's beaten Jim Miller, he's beaten Sean Shirk, he's beaten Gray Maynard, he's beaten Charles Oliveira, Cub Swanson. I'm cheating, I'm looking at his record. He's beaten Uriah Faber, Chad Mendes, Jeremy Stevenson, Cub Swanson twice, Yair Rodriguez, and then you're going to put Max Holloway on that? That's insane. And the most impressive thing, when you look at his, I think might be his losses. When you look at his losses, every one of Frankie Edgar's losses has come to people who's either won a UFC title or has fought for a UFC title. That's insane. He hasn't had that like, oh, that's a terrible loss on his record. And he's been doing this for a real. I mean, he was fighting during the Tough era. When there was like when people actually watched Tough, not when Juan Espinoza was winning. But when you compare guys who are already, and people say, if anybody says like, oh, he wouldn't be a top 10, well, who are you ranking in the top? Like Chuck Liddell's ranked in the top 10. You want to compare Chuck Liddell's resume to Frankie Edgar? It blows it away. I'm going to say something extremely bold. Frankie Edgar is so good that if he fought his entire career at bantamweight, we might be talking about him in the number 1 spot. And Nick, correct? I want to congratulate you on a wonderful run. Taking second place on your first time in is really good accomplishments, bro.
I will have you know, before we throw it over to Nick, I'll give him some time to ponder everything that just happened there. Before I got into the MMA media world, the only fight I have ever actually bet on for money was Frankie Edgar versus BJ Penn 1. And I bet on Frankie Edgar, and I got paid handsomely for that fight because I just had a feeling that Frankie was going to win that fight. But Nick, let's just say Frankie Edgar goes into the Great White North, the great country of Canada, on Saturday and beats Max Holloway, which, like Keith said, is not out of the realm of possibility when we're talking about a guy as gritty, as tough, as seasoned as Frankie Edgar is. Where does that put him in your list for all-time best UFC fighters? Where does he rank, pound for pound? All that craziness.
Sure. Well, the thing with Frankie Edgar is, what would put him at near the top of that pound for pound list? I don't know if it's top 5, top 10, but he would be in the conversation without a doubt. The reason why, it's not just because he was the lightweight champion and the featherweight champion. Not many people can say they've held 2 titles in 2 weight classes. That's a great accomplishment. But the thing is, his longevity. That is really what would put him in that conversation. His longevity as a contender. This guy was a contender before I was born. I mean, he's been a contender in 3 different eras of the sport. When he was beating a washed up BJ Penn for the 3rd time back in 2014, that was a different era than this. That was 5 years ago. He was, and that was before. That was well after his days as the lightweight champion. This guy has been relevant for as long as I can remember, and that's why, if he goes in there and beats Max Holloway, which I don't think he'll do, but if he does, because that's the question you presented with us, Mike, he will be top 5 pound for pound. I mean, Demetrius Johnson might be tactically better than him. Jon Jones might be tactically better than him. Anderson Silva, GSP. There are numerous fighters out there in the past that are probably better fighters than Frankie Edgar, but no one's as tough, no one's as resilient, and no one has been around as a contender for as long as Frankie Edgar.
Well, I like both of those answers. I'm a Frankie Edgar fan. If we're taking the media hat on, putting the fan hat on, I cannot wait for this fight. I am really excited for it, and I'm really excited to hear Keith Schillen come back next week and try to get back in the win column, because Nick Baldwin is this week's champion of Between the Links. Congratulations, sir. Representing Bloody Elbow and the folks at Vox Media very well. You now have 30 seconds to speak about whatever it is you would like to speak about, good, bad, or indifferent, when it comes to the world of mixed martial arts.
Well, first of all, I'm sure it's beginner's luck, but thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate the win. Sorry, Keith. I'm sure when I'm not here next week, you'll get the win. As far as my message to the MMA fans out there listening, come to the Great White North. This card might not be very good. I said it myself. I mean, even Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar isn't an amazing pay-per-view main event. I'm not all that intrigued by it, if I'm being totally honest. It's a good fight, but I think Holloway wins handily. Other than that, there's not much. But hey, Edmonton's a great place. Canada's a great place. I guess that's the one good thing about this card. So there we go. Just a plug for the Great White North.
Enjoy UFC 240 this weekend.